Every decade has its rebellious side, but the 1970s were the years when Hollywood seemed to completely lose control and didn't bother hiding it. Filmmakers pushed limits, censorship boards were overwhelmed, and audiences flocked to see movies so outrageous they often made headlines for all the wrong reasons. What motivates a director to create something so shocking that entire countries refuse to show it? And which films pushed boundaries so far that people are still talking about them decades later? Get ready, because we're diving into some of the most brutal exploitation films the 1970s ever unleashed. Sugar Cookies, 1973. If you want proof of how far even future Oscar winners were willing to go to get noticed in Hollywood, Sugar Cookies is a perfect example. Forget glamorous premieres. This story begins in the gutter and somehow manages to sink even deeper. Long before Oliver Stone became famous for political dramas, he was a struggling writer and producer trying to survive in an industry obsessed with sensationalism. Stone co-wrote and produced the film, which plays like a sleazy murder mystery wrapped inside an erotic hallucination and soaked in the grimy atmosphere of 1970s exploitation cinema. The story centers on a young actress who becomes trapped in a dangerous scheme created by a manipulative filmmaker and ends up dead. Her lover doesn't go to the police. Instead, he becomes a calculating strategist, grooming another woman to lure the killer into a trap. Imagine if Vertigo suddenly swerved into underground midnight movie territory and packed every taboo imaginable into the story. Director Theodore Gershony was determined to make a name for himself, and if that meant borrowing Hitchcock-style suspense and adding scandal, manipulation, and murder, he was willing to do it. The strange part is how the film later became an embarrassment for many of the people involved. Oliver Stone rarely acknowledged it afterward, and some actors reportedly tried to distance themselves from the credits. But the damage, or the legend, was already done. The movie was banned in several countries, including Germany and Australia, and its reputation spread through whispers and late-night screenings. Today it remains a strange cult relic, often described as both difficult to watch and impossible to forget. If Hollywood seems cleaner today, remember that some of its most respected storytellers once started their careers in the mud, and Sugar Cookies proves it. Elsa, She-Wolf of the SS, 1975. Some movies offend audiences, but others go so far that they ignite controversy for decades. Elsa, She-Wolf of the SS belongs firmly in that category, a film that still makes viewers ask how it was ever produced in the first place. The premise is outrageous. Elsa is a brutal Nazi commandant running a prison camp where she tries to prove women are stronger than men through cruelty and twisted experiments. Torture, humiliation, and graphic violence fill the screen, making modern horror franchises look tame by comparison. Actress Diane Thorne played the role with chilling intensity, creating a villain who is both unforgettable and terrifying. There's no humor to soften the brutality. Elsa carries out her experiments and punishments with icy determination. The film piles together nearly every exploitation trope imaginable: women in prison drama, wartime shock value, and scenes so extreme that even the special effects team reportedly struggled with them. Shot on a tiny budget, the rough production only added to its grim atmosphere. Ironically, attempts to suppress the movie only made it more famous. Some cast members even tried to remove their names from the credits, but the film spread through midnight screenings and underground distribution. It was banned in many places around the world, yet still managed to spawn sequels and countless imitators. Perhaps the reason is simple. The film never pretends to teach a lesson. It exists purely to provoke and shock. Elsa, She-Wolf of the SS became one of exploitation cinema's most infamous titles, surviving censorship battles and becoming a strange legend in movie history. Caged Heat, 1974. Before women in prison films became an easy joke on late-night television, there was Caged Heat, the movie that essentially defined the genre. Surprisingly, it was directed by Jonathan Demme, who would later win an Academy Award for The Silence of the Lambs. In 1974, however, Demme was simply another filmmaker working for producer Roger Corman, whose low-budget filmmaking school encouraged directors to make movies quickly, cheaply, and as wildly as possible. From its opening scenes, Caged Heat delivers exactly that approach. The film features a cruel female prison warden, a sinister doctor performing disturbing experiments, and inmates pushed to their limits in a brutal environment. Catfights, riots, power struggles, and an explosive prison break fill the story. The prison itself feels as dangerous as the inmates, with guards who are just as ruthless as the people they supervise. Everything in the movie is exaggerated and intense. Yet beneath the Grindhouse chaos, Dem quietly introduces moments of solidarity between the prisoners and hints at rebellion against corrupt authority. Some critics even describe the film as oddly progressive despite its sensational surface. Made on a minimal budget and filled with drive-in theater thrills, it still gained attention and was banned in several places for its violent and provocative scenes. In hindsight, it's remarkable that the same director who later created Oscar-winning films once began with such outrageous material. Caged Heat remains proof that even respected filmmakers sometimes start their careers in the most chaotic corners of the industry. Pink Flamingos, 1972. If you want to see cinematic rebellion at its absolute extreme, Pink Flamingos is the answer. The movie doesn't merely cross boundaries, it burns them down completely. Director John Waters famously described the film as cinematic terrorism, and the description isn't far from the truth. With almost no budget and a group of friends willing to perform the most outrageous scenes imaginable, Waters set out to create something that shattered every rule of conventional filmmaking. The story follows Divine, a drag performer who proudly holds the title of the filthiest person alive. When a pair of equally depraved rivals attempt to steal that title, a bizarre competition begins, filled with shocking acts, public indecency, and scenes that audiences still discuss decades later. Waters wasn't interested in shock purely for attention. His goal was to challenge the limits of what society considered acceptable. The reaction was immediate. The film was banned in numerous countries and censored heavily elsewhere, while moral campaigners condemned it as obscene. It received an X rating and later became part of the Criterion Collection, turning a once reviled movie into a celebrated piece of outsider art. Fans transformed screenings into midnight rituals, even as unprepared viewers sometimes walked out in disgust. Waters embraced the controversy and built a devoted cult following that reshaped underground cinema. Pink Flamingos isn't simply a movie, it's a challenge. Even today, watching it feels like a test of endurance, and it remains one of the most outrageous films ever made. The Arena, 1974. When most people think of Pam Grier, they imagine blaxploitation action films set in gritty urban environments. The Arena, however, places her in ancient Rome, fighting as a gladiator alongside co-star Margaret Markov. The result is one of the strangest genre combinations of the decade. Instead of a traditional historical epic, the film becomes a wild exploitation spectacle filled with blood, betrayal, and dramatic combat. The story follows two enslaved women, one black and one white, forced to fight in gladiatorial contests for the entertainment of Roman crowds. Their popularity eventually sparks rebellion among the fighters. Brutal battles dominate the film, and the revealing costumes and gritty fight scenes constantly push the limits of what censors would allow. Interestingly, the production used leftover sets from massive historical epics like Ben-Hur and Cleopatra, giving the movie an unexpectedly grand visual backdrop despite its tiny budget. Director Steve Carver leaned fully into the spectacle, delivering non-stop action, betrayals, and moments of unexpected friendship between the gladiators. Pam Grier herself once described the film as fun trash, but it carried a deeper message about power and survival. Its intense violence led to bans in several countries, yet audiences in the United States embraced it as a cult favorite. Today The Arena stands as a strange but fascinating example of exploitation cinema with surprising ambition. Thriller. A Cruel Picture, 1973. Long before modern revenge films became stylish blockbusters, this Swedish exploitation movie shocked audiences with its brutality. Thriller. A Cruel Picture was notorious for its raw violence and disturbing imagery, leading to bans in many countries. The story follows a young woman played by Christina Lindberg who is kidnapped as a child and forced into a life of exploitation. Silent and traumatized, she secretly plans her revenge. Throughout the film she endures horrific abuse, including the infamous scene in which her eye is gouged out, a moment so realistic that rumors spread it might have been real. Instead of remaining a victim, she trains herself relentlessly with firearms, martial arts, and weapons until she becomes a relentless force of vengeance. Director Bo Arne Vibenius openly admitted he wanted to create a shocking exploitation film that audiences would never forget. The movie's extreme content ensured it was banned in several countries, including Sweden and Australia, but the controversy only increased its reputation. Decades later, filmmakers such as Quentin Tarantino would cite it as a major influence. For fans of cult cinema, Thriller remains one of the most uncompromising revenge films ever produced. Hollywood Boulevard, 1976. Long before self-aware movies became trendy, Hollywood Boulevard was already parodying the exploitation industry that produced it. Produced by Roger Corman and directed by Joe Dante in his first feature, the film turns the camera toward the chaotic world of low-budget filmmaking. The story follows a young woman who arrives in Hollywood hoping to become an actress and ends up working for an incompetent movie studio where accidents and disasters seem to happen constantly. Corman famously challenged Dante to complete the movie in only 10 days using leftover footage and props from other productions. The result is a chaotic comedy packed with explosions, recycled scenes, and endless inside jokes about the exploitation business. Despite the humor, the movie also acts as a strange tribute to the industry that created it. Its depiction of reckless filmmaking and dangerous stunt work caused some controversy, but audiences who understood the joke embraced it as a cult favorite. Blacula, 1972. A vampire film within the blaxploitation movement might sound unusual, but Blacula managed to become both a horror hit and a cultural milestone. The film stars William Marshall as an African prince who is cursed by Dracula and transformed into a vampire. Centuries later, he awakens in 1970s Los Angeles and begins stalking the city's nightlife. Marshall insisted that his character be portrayed with dignity rather than as a stereotype, giving the film emotional depth rarely seen in exploitation horror. Blending supernatural thrills with funk-era style and music, the movie stood out immediately. It became a box office success and eventually inspired a sequel. Some countries censored or banned it because of its violence and provocative themes, but its influence on horror cinema and representation was undeniable. Today, Blacula is remembered as both a cult favorite and a groundbreaking film that expanded the possibilities of the genre. Super Vixens, 1975. Director Russ Meyer was famous for pushing boundaries, and Super Vixens might be his most outrageous film. Many cities refused to screen it, and it struggled to obtain an official rating. The story follows a gas station worker who is falsely accused of murder and forced to flee across America. Along the way, he encounters a bizarre collection of larger-than-life characters, explosive fights, and absurd situations. Meyer funded much of the film himself and filled it with exaggerated violence, chaotic editing, and surreal humor. Despite, or perhaps because of, its outrageous content, the movie became a defining example of exploitation cinema. Some critics dismissed it as ridiculous, while others praised its wild creativity. I Spit on Your Grave, 1978, also known as Day of the Woman, remains one of the most controversial films ever released. The story follows writer Jennifer Hills, who retreats to a rural area seeking peace but becomes the victim of a brutal attack by local men. Surviving the ordeal, she methodically tracks down each attacker and takes revenge. The graphic depiction of violence outraged critics and led to bans in numerous countries, including Australia, Norway, and Ireland. In the United Kingdom, the film was repeatedly banned and later released again, becoming infamous as part of the video nasty controversy. Actress Camille Keaton's performance gave the story emotional intensity that made the film difficult to ignore. Supporters argued it was a statement about revenge and justice, while critics condemned it as exploitative. Regardless of opinion, the film secured a permanent place in exploitation cinema history. Dismissed by many critics as nothing more than a bag of garbage, the film still managed to attract huge crowds curious about the controversy surrounding it. Despite the backlash, audiences continued to pour into theaters to see what the uproar was about. Against expectations, The movie earned more than $5 million worldwide from a budget of only $650,000, proving once again that controversy can fuel success instead of destroying it. I Spit on Your Grave remains one of the most divisive films ever released, admired by some, despised by others, constantly debated, and impossible to forget. If the filmmakers wanted to leave a lasting impact, they certainly achieved it in the most explosive way imaginable. Last House on the Left, 1972. When Wes Craven created Last House on the Left, he was an inexperienced director with little to lose and a determination to push viewers to their limits. The result was a movie so disturbing and uncompromising that many theaters refused to screen it. Censors cut large portions of the film, while several countries banned it completely. Even decades later, it is still regarded as a landmark of shock horror, a film that doesn't merely step over the line between art and exploitation but stomps across it without hesitation. The story begins simply enough. Two teenage girls travel into the city for a rock concert, only to encounter a group of vicious criminals. What follows becomes a horrifying chain of violence, humiliation, and revenge. Shot in a gritty, documentary-like style, the film feels disturbingly real. There is no polished Hollywood shine, only harsh brutality, bleak humor, and an overwhelming sense of dread that never eases. Craven's camera refuses to turn away, forcing audiences to confront harsh realities that most movies prefer to avoid. The backlash was immediate and fierce. In the United Kingdom, the film was banned for years. In the United States, some theaters marketed it as if it were based on a true story to attract thrill seekers, while others refused to screen it entirely. The movie quickly became a focal point in debates about censorship, morality, and cinema's power to shock people out of their comfort zones. Regardless of the outrage, or perhaps because of it, Last House on the Left established itself as a pioneering example of raw, realistic horror and inspired filmmakers who were tired of playing safe. Craven later became one of horror's most celebrated directors, but he never again produced something quite this harsh and uncompromising. Last House on the Left remains a symbol of the untamed creative freedom that defined 1970s exploitation cinema, daring viewers to look away while challenging them to keep watching. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. There is a reason people still speak about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre with a mixture of fear and fascination. The film stands as one of the earliest fever dreams of American horror, a relentless nightmare that transformed a tiny budget into massive box office success while being banned in numerous countries. Forget the countless sequels and remakes that followed. The original 1974 version was a raw burst of terror created by a group of determined outsiders who had no idea they were about to reshape the horror genre forever. Director Tobe Hooper worked with almost no funding, a largely inexperienced cast, and the brutal heat of a Texas summer. The final result feels like something pulled straight from a nightmare. The premise is simple but deeply unsettling. A group of young travelers on a road trip encounter a twisted family of cannibals, including their terrifying enforcer, Leatherface, who wears masks made from human skin. What makes the Texas Chainsaw Massacre so powerful isn't just violence, it's the documentary-like realism. The sweat, dirt, fear, and chaos seem to seep through the screen. The movie became a favorite at drive-ins and midnight showings, yet it also drew intense scrutiny from censors. Officials in the United Kingdom, Australia, Germany, and several Scandinavian countries banned the film almost immediately, calling it too disturbing for public viewing. Some American cities attempted to block it as well, and the controversy only increased public curiosity. Instead of relying on excessive blood, Hooper used tension, pacing, and atmosphere to create an overwhelming feeling of dread. The result is a haunting sense of terror that lingers long after the film ends. Today, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is widely considered a horror masterpiece that proved a small budget could still terrify an entire generation. Yet at the time, and in some places even now, it was viewed as far too brutal and realistic for polite society. Fight for Your Life, 1977. While some films merely flirt with controversy, Fight for Your Life seemed determined to provoke outrage at every turn. Released near the end of the 1970s exploitation boom, this home invasion thriller gained notoriety for its shocking violence, constant racial insults, and its willingness to cross every possible boundary. The movie is so intense that it almost feels like it challenges viewers to either endure it or walk away in disgust. The story is brutally straightforward. A group of escaped prisoners led by a viciously racist criminal invades the home of an African-American family and subjects them to a terrifying night of psychological and physical abuse. The film never softens its impact, diving straight into extremely uncomfortable territory without offering the audience any relief. Director Robert N. Elson presents the story not as a distant thriller, but as a painfully close look at some of the darkest aspects of American society. Every insult, every act of violence, and every desperate reaction unfolds right in front of the viewer. The film was quickly banned in the United Kingdom and several European nations. In the United States, many theaters refused to show it, and censors struggled with how to respond. However, among Grindhouse audiences, its shocking reputation made it even more popular, turning the film into a sought-after title on the underground bootleg market. For years it remained one of the most infamous video nasties, often cited as an example of exploitation cinema at its most extreme. Yet beneath all the cruelty lies a grim sense of catharsis when the victims finally fight back, reversing the power dynamic in a finale that is both explosive and deeply unsettling. Fight for Your Life is not for sensitive viewers or anyone expecting subtlety. It stands as one of the most controversial and fiercely debated exploitation films ever made. The Big Dollhouse, 1971. Anyone curious about the origins of the women in prison genre should look directly at The Big Dollhouse. This movie sparked a wave of imitators and turned a low-budget formula into a worldwide phenomenon. Packed with violence, sadistic authority figures, and outrageous situations, the film quickly drew the attention of censors across the globe. One of its highlights is the early performance of Pam Grier, whose charisma and strength were already evident and would later make her an icon of exploitation cinema. Set inside a remote jungle prison, the story throws viewers into chaos from the very beginning. The inmates are hardened survivors, the guards are cruel, and the warden is a tyrant obsessed with humiliation and punishment. Director Jack Hill wastes no time building the film's wild atmosphere. Instead, he plunges audiences into a dangerous environment where survival depends on intelligence, courage, and refusing to show weakness. The film escalates constantly, featuring riotous food fights, daring escape plots, brutal discipline, and the type of shower fights that would later become a staple of Grindhouse movies. Yet The Big Dollhouse offers more than pure chaos. Hill also gives the prisoners moments of camaraderie and personality, allowing them to feel like real people rather than simple stereotypes. Pam Grier in particular dominates scene after scene with her magnetic presence. The film's breakneck pace and shameless attitude toward social norms made it extremely popular at American drive-ins, but it also resulted in bans and heavy censorship in parts of Europe, Australia, and Asia. None of that stopped its success. The Big Dollhouse earned impressive profits, launched an entire subgenre, and helped establish Pam Grier as one of exploitation cinema's most recognizable stars. Decades later, its influence still echoes whenever modern films attempt to replicate the wild energy of Grindhouse entertainment. Blood-Sucking Freaks, 1976. Some movies seek controversy, but Blood-Sucking Freaks seems to thrive on it. This infamous Grindhouse production gained legendary status not because it tiptoed around bad taste, but because it plunged directly into it without hesitation. Directed by Joel M. Reed and promoted as Theater of the Macabre, the film developed a reputation for being so outrageous that even seasoned horror fans found it shocking. The story revolves around Sardou, a sadistic theater owner in New York City who stages grotesque performances that blur the boundary between entertainment and reality. With help from his silent assistant Ralphus, Sardou kidnaps women and subjects them to horrifying displays of torture, manipulation, and disturbing special effects disguised as theatrical acts. Every scene is deliberately exaggerated, pushing shock value to the extreme. The performances are intentionally over the top, the humor is dark and twisted, and the film appears designed to offend nearly everyone. Censors around the world reacted quickly. The movie was banned in the United Kingdom, New Zealand, Australia, and several other countries. Even in the United States, it faced legal challenges and widespread refusal from theaters unwilling to show it. Critics dismissed it as tasteless trash, but its notoriety helped it gain a devoted cult audience. Among horror fans, VHS copies circulated almost like forbidden contraband for those curious enough to test their tolerance. Ultimately, blood-sucking freaks became a strange badge of honor among viewers who believed they had seen everything. It certainly isn't for the easily disturbed or those seeking subtle storytelling. But for fans fascinated by the most extreme edges of 1970s exploitation cinema, it represents the ultimate challenge. The final film you must witness or at least endure to believe it exists. So what do you think? Did Hollywood truly cross the line during this era? Or did it simply redefine where that line existed? These 15 films didn't just face bans and outrage. They reshaped the boundaries of filmmaking itself, shocking censors, thrilling audiences, and inspiring future directors to take risks others would avoid. Which one would you dare to watch? And which would you avoid completely? Share your thoughts, subscribe for more fascinating stories from film history, and pass this along to anyone who claims they've seen everything. After exploring these movies, you might discover that the definition of too far is far more complicated than it first appears.